to my first how-to video today. We are going to be making a decor shelf. So it's going to be very similar to this. There will be some small differences, but we're gonna make something like this. This is our inspiration today, along with some of our other inspo photos that we found on Pinterest. So, okay, here is the inspo board that I came up with. You can see our materials, tools, steps, a little drawing, and then of course the inspo photos from Pinterest. All right, let's start by going over our materials and tools needed. We need a 2x4 that's 4 foot in length, a 1x6 that's 4 foot in length, wood glue, screws, stain or paint, a finishing coat or clear coat of some sort, rope, saw, tape measure, an impact driver, a drill, drill bits, pencil, safety glasses, clamps, sander or sandpaper, of course, scissors or a utility knife, and then paintbrush or a rag for staining. All right, a quick overview of our steps. We're going to measure the space, draw out the plan, which I've already done. You can see that here. We're going to measure our material and mark our cuts, cut the material, lay out the design, mark and drill holes for the hanging rope, sand any rough edges, glue and clamp the shelves in place, pre-drill the screw holes, screw the screws in, let dry completely, probably for about 24 hours, of course, remove the clamps, do any final sanding that's needed, stain, paint, dry completely, of course, and then add the finishing coat. I'm going to be putting the shelf in the bathroom. So my space that I'm measuring is just above the toilet. That's where I want to hang the shelf. By measuring your space, you want to visualize where you're going to hang this and get the dimensions and the rough measurements that you may want. Once you've measured your space and you have an idea of the measurements you want and you like where you're going to hang your shelf, go ahead and draw up a quick plan. Of course, I have already done that, and we will move on to step 2. All right. Now that we've measured our space and visualized and figured out exactly the dimensions that we want to make this, right? So of course, if you want to alter some of those dimensions, make it smaller, bigger, after you see where you want to put it, go ahead, do that. Just make sure you have enough material to cover what you're trying to do. So we need to make our cuts and mark them. First thing I always recommend is cutting off the factory edges and then measuring from there. So we're gonna cut off the factory edges, mark our cuts, and then we will lay out our design after we do this. So we're gonna have, not including the factory cuts, right? We're gonna have 2 cuts from the 2x4, and we are gonna have 3 cuts from the 1x6. So let's hop over to the saw and go ahead and do that. So basically what I said is I'm going to use this other one as a guide so they're the same length. Make sure to cut off the factory edge. There's a few different ways you can do it. You could use the saw itself as a stopper if you wanted to, if you're making multiple cuts, or you could just use one as a template and make all your cuts. But long story short, that's it. And now it's time to cut the 1x6s. So we're going to make 3 cuts. We need 3 shelves total at 15 inches. Now it's time to lay out our design. So what I'm doing is getting my 2x4 situated, and then I'm just going to put in my shelves. So when I do this, I'm going to be deciding what do I want for spacing. The first step I do in this is just visually look and see what I think looks nice. Do I like about where they're at? Do I want them all equal? Do I want one taller shelf and a shorter shelf with spacing? And just decide what I want. After I have an idea of about where I want it, I'm gonna measure so I have an exact amount of where I need to put my holes. So I've laid out the design and I've landed on 7 inches between shelves. So I'm going to move on to our next step, and then it looks like I have some sanding I need to do here. My 2x4s are pretty rough, and I'd like to round out the corners on the shelves so they're not sharp. Here we're gonna measure and mark where we want our holes to go, and then we're gonna take our drill and we're gonna go ahead and drill those holes. So for my rope, I am using a 5/8 inch drill bit. I will say the rope and all the inspiration photos was quite a bit thicker. So if you got something thicker, just make sure that you have the right drill bit size for it. And you can go ahead and adjust as needed, right? You could always start out smaller, and if you need to make the hole bigger, then move up to the next size. The worst thing I think you want to do is make a hole too big and then it just doesn't work or it doesn't look good. It looks a little funky. So always start smaller and then work your way up. So I'm going to use this 3/8 drill bit. I'm going to mark my spots. I'm going to take one of my clamps that I'm going to use later and I'm going to clamp it to my workspace just to help me drill. So if you had a drill press, perfect. You wouldn't have to worry about any of that. I think I'm going to go the center of my hole about either 2 inches. Yeah, I like 2 inches down. So I'm gonna do 2 inches down. And then of course I'm gonna measure, right to the center here. Okay, time to sand those edges. So I'm gonna sand down the edges so they're just a little bit more rounded and not so sharp, as well as making sure to get around the holes that I just drilled. And then I'm gonna go and do all the shelves too. Now that the sanding is complete, we're gonna go ahead and put our shelf together. So I've actually cut out some spacers so I know that I will have the exact amount of space that I want between my shelves, and it will just help everything stay nice and square and flush. So I'm gonna flush up the bottom and clamp these in place. This is going to help me when I go to glue in that bottom shelf. So our next step here is to glue and clamp together. So I'm going to glue the bottom shelf in, put a clamp on, and then after I get that clamp on, I am going to go ahead and pre-drill our holes and use finishing screws to tighten it and secure it together. You could also use nails if you wanted. You could also do one or the other. You could just nail it or just screw it and not glue it, or you could just glue it if you don't plan on having anything of substantial weight on the shelves. Your next steps are going to be to repeat steps 6 through 8 actually, and glue in those other 2 shelves and screw them into place. After that, we're going to go ahead and let this dry for 24 hours. All right, we've repeated our steps. We've let our glue dry. Did any final sanding, right? That was a step. If you wanted to do some final sanding, you could. So we did that. I'm going to cut my rope. We're gonna prep our spot to paint or stain. Then we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we're gonna dry and see what it looks like after we're done. So I'm going to use an espresso stain. It's gonna be fairly dark. I'm gonna try it out, see what I like. I'm also gonna use this little brush to stain, or a rag. I haven't quite decided yet. Typically I like a rag that just doesn't soak it up as much, so you can spread it out, and then I feel like you don't get as much run in the stain or the paint as you do if you use like a sponge brush. As well, if you're painting, I would recommend using like a sponge brush or something like that, or a really good bristle brush. Otherwise you're gonna get, you see your brush strokes. So that is another thing. Something I do want to mention, you could use wood putty or filler if you wanted to fill in your screw holes, so you wouldn't have those showing. And a lot of that is paintable, so just watch, for what you're getting. I have some wood filler here. Looks like real wood, repairs cracks, gouges, and holes. Interior, exterior, easy water cleanup, stainable, paintable, and can be troweled and molded. So this is just the natural, so I could do, my little screw holes here and just make sure you couldn't see it. So we glued it. They're not, there's no reason you're gonna move the shelves. You can't. So you wanted to have a nice smooth finish and not have any of those holes. You could definitely use something like this to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut our rope, and then we're gonna prep, like I said, and get everything ready to go here. So I think I'm gonna cut mine about 3 feet or so. That should be long enough. You could always string one through the side, tie it, and see, where you want it. A little bit of stain really does go a long way. So, start with a light coat and then add on progressively. The darker you want it, the more coats you could do. You can let it dry. If you didn't you wanted it darker, you could do another one, so on and so forth. Now that our staining is done, we're gonna go ahead and let this dry completely. We're back. Our stain or paint is dry. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. Looking pretty good. I'm going to clear coat this. That way, just a little protectant. And I'm going to use some shellac. However, you can use many different things. There are a lot of different clear coat things that you can use. Just be sure your stain or your paint is completely dry. And then of course, once you spray this, you're gonna need to let that dry as well. So we also have our rope. You can wait. I'm going to spray it, let it dry, and then do our rope later. But of course, you're gonna just tie it through here, put little knots at the end, and then we'll be ready to hang it up and style it. So let's go ahead and get this sprayed. Okay, we've made it. Our shelf is dry. We got one more step, guys. One more step, last step. Tying our rope. So I found the easiest way to go from the inside out on each side, and then tie a knot however you see fit. So whatever way you want to go ahead and tie your knot, you go ahead and do that. I'll turn this here so you can see the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to loop it to here, like that. I actually to go. I don't want it so big, so here we go. Right, tighten her up. Do it there. I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Your shelf is complete. You just have to hang it where you saw fit. Style it, put some cool stuff on there. Here we go. Okay. Done. Okay, let's take a look from where we started, our inspiration board, with our photos and our drawing. We visualized it, we measured it, we're making this come to life. We wrote out our materials, we have all our tools, and we have our steps that we needed. The last thing we need to do is hang this.